from the Mutual Broadcasting System. This is STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. Now, retired Marine Intelligence Officer and globally recognized risk expert Hal Kempfer.
Welcome to STRAT, and we're going to talk about some strategic risk assessment stuff. I'm going to kind of do something different. I'm going to dig into an issue and get into some of the specifics of what's popped up back in the news again, because a couple of ships were attacked by the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and this has been after a long hiatus where they weren't attacking. I do kind of find it interesting that these things percolate up. The fundamental problem, the fundamental issues of why there is a conflict there don't seem to really disappear. We just sort of buy these temporary ceasefire things, and then we kind of assume that everything will kind of work its way out. But obviously, as we can see with the Houthis, nothing's working its way out. They're right back to what they were doing before. And so I thought it would be a good time to kind of just run through some things with the Houthis and talk about them. Now, who are the Houthis? Well, the leader of the Houthis, his name is Houthi, or Houthi, as they like to pronounce it. Officially, Ansar Allah. It's a Shiite branch of Islam from the 8th century of the current era, or AD. It's a Zaydi revivalist, is what it's called. It's a Shiite Islamist political military organization that emerged from Yemen really in the... If you go back to the original Zaydi revivalist thing, that actually goes back to really the 8th century. So that's been around for a very long time. But this particular movement goes back about 3 decades. Now, the Houthis are not all Zaydis, as they call them, but they are predominantly Zaydis. And the namesake is drawn from the Al-Houthi family, the Al-Houthi clan, if you want to call them that. This group has been a central player in Yemen's civil war, which goes back decades, and it has drawn widespread condemnation from the United States, from regional countries, from Arab countries, from Europe, from all around the world as an extremist group and a serial violator of human rights, and just a long record of human rights abuses, which are just truly vile on any level. The movement was designated by a terrorist organization by a lot of countries, and it's backed by Iran. And I should point out something rather obvious, which is Yemen, which is in the far south part of the Saudi peninsula. You could say the far southwestern part of the Saudi peninsula. And the Houthis are actually in the southwestern part of that, if you will, or at least the western part of Yemen. And so that's where they are. And they are a kind of what you'll see on the Saudi Peninsula is predominantly Sunni, with these enclaves, historical enclaves of Shiite sects. Big in Yemen, obviously. But we also see this in other parts. In Saudi Arabia, there are Shiites. In fact, one of the conundrums, one of the interesting things about the Gulf states is that the Bahraini royal family is Sunni, while most of the population is Shiite. It's just one of those interesting things, demographics, if you will, that religious demographics, I should say, over there. So anyway, these guys are Shiite, but in a vast continent full of Sunnis, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Sunni-Shiite split in a bit. But they're backed by Iran. Of course, Iran has been pushing hard, not just against all the Sunni countries, but also using Israel as its spar, if you will. And of course, we all remember that Israel and Iran just had its famous 12-day war, where they were doing airstrikes and missiles and drones and all sorts of stuff back and forth with each other. And it is also considered a member of the Axis of Resistance led by Iran, by the Revolutionary Guard Corps, by its Al-Quds force. And this area of control in Yemen is astride the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, but also the critical Bab el-Mandeb Straits. which connects the Gulf of Aden with the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, of course, is the entree to the Suez Canal, which is one of the most critical choke point waterways on the planet. And that's what they have been basically closing up, causing amazing problems of international shipping. Now, this group of Shiite Zaydi, this sect, ruled essentially in Yemen for about 1,000 years, up until 1962. And then there were a lot of changes. And then, as you know, you had war and divisions, and eventually the Houthis carved out their own section of Yemen, separate and apart from the government of Yemen. And it's been kind of a status quo thing ever since. They battled the central government for many, many years, and they eventually seized control of the capital of Yemen, Sana'a, in 2014. Now, that launched a grinding war that is technically still being waged, if you will. There still is a civil war there, despite ebbs and flows and lasting truces, kind of, or ceasefires, or low-level confrontation, whatever you want to call it. But this war in Yemen has cost 150,000 people. I mean, it's just stunning the amount of people who've been lost. That is combatants and non-combatants both. And it's one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. I should also mention that Saudi Arabia intervened in 2015 and fought for years. They used all of their technological prowess, the airstrikes, all these things, trying to bludgeon and beat down the Houthi movement. And eventually they came to an agreement where they just ended that war. And that truce still stands between them and the Saudis. And you may recall that the Houthis did a number of things, for example, launching drone strikes that went into Saudi Arabia and into the United Arab Emirates, who is also opposed to the Houthis. So that tension still exists, even though the active firing between those groups has not. Now, I should mention that the flow of trade through the Red Sea corridor, about $1 trillion every year. It is a huge amount of money. And the Suez Canal revenues dropped more than 50% when the Houthis started actively targeting ships going through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And it has remained extremely low ever since. And a lot of major shipping lines just simply go around the Cape of Good Hope, around the southern part of Africa, and suck up the additional time in transit, but also the additional cost in fuel, manpower, because when you have a ship underway, you're paying for all the crew and you're paying for extra maintenance on the ship and all that stuff. They've just said, look, that's better than taking a chance. Now, the attacks had just occurred on the Magic Seas and the Eternity Sea ships represent a sudden spike in the amount of at-sea violence, if you will, being employed. There's also a spike because crew members have been killed. Now, a lot of folks have looked at these assaults as being very complex in nature. They weren't just simple strikes, if you will. They showed a certain operational acumen to the Houthis that we hadn't quite seen before. And so everybody's kind of looking at this, looking at all the vessels that are going in and out of the Red Sea and looking at some of the things the Houthis are doing. And they have used anti-ship missiles. They've used sea drones with explosives and all sorts of stuff. So the Houthis have a long history. They have a history of using small boats with anti-tank missiles that were used to take out surface combatants as well. So they've done some rather innovative thing. And both of these ships, these commercial ships, were sank within a matter of days from when they were hit. And the fear is that the attack on the Eternity 6 may have been the group's deadliest attack so far, since there are still crew members missing and presumed dead. So it's been a pretty horrific thing. Now, these attacks also signal that the Israeli and U.S. or U.S. coalition-led airstrikes have not stripped the Houthi rebels of their ability to launch attacks. I don't think anybody really thought that they had been completely obliterated, if you will, in terms of their ability to launch drones and anti-ship missiles. But there had been hopes that they had been significantly set back. Now, there's a lot of doubts that they have been significantly set back because of what they just did. So the question is, where do we go from here? What do we do now? That's a big question. There is now the increased cost of international shipping, whatever gradual increase we saw during the ceasefire. As far as maritime insurance companies are concerned and the big shipping companies are concerned, pardon the expression, but the juice ain't worth the squeeze of going through the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Gulf of Aden and the Suez Canal if they're going to lose a ship. At some point, you just have to do the numbers. You go, it's just not worth it. The other thing is that I don't think anybody has confidence that the Houthis are very careful at targeting ships. Ostensibly they'll say they're going after ships they're going after Israeli ships. Well, there's not a lot. There's not very many Israeli flagged ships. In fact, very, very few in the world. Most ships that may have at some point through layers of shell companies Israeli ownership are flying another country's flag and have another country as the ship where it's registered or the ship of ownership is. So they kind of shoot at ships based on a hunch or suspicion or whatever. And a hunch, a suspicion by a group of Islamic extremists sitting up on a hill with an anti-ship missile, just not something that Maersk or any other major ship line or MSC is going to take a chance with. So that's the issue. And for Egypt, they're getting closer and closer to a decision point. Now, I should mention that Egypt, way back when, I don't know, it was like 50 years ago, 40 years ago, something like that. Anyway, they did actually put boots on the ground in Yemen to help fight the precursors, whatever, to the Houthi movement way back when. They had boots on the ground, and they found that to be a very unsatisfactory military adventure, and they have since not shown any interest in putting boots on the ground in Yemen. But on the other hand, they're looking at one of their primary sources of revenue, the Suez Canal, pardon the expression, drying up. And the longer this goes on, the worse the financial impact on Egypt. Egypt needs the revenue. Egypt needs the Suez Canal operating. So Egypt's kind of hitting a decision point on what they want to do and how much they're willing to expend. The problem is that there's been a lot of airstrikes all over. There's been airstrikes in Sana'a, in the capital, in and around the major airport. They've gone after major leadership targets. It looked like they tried to take out the head of the Houthi movement in one of the strikes. I don't think that doesn't appear that was successful, but there's been a lot of discussion about what they can do or can't do. The problem is that when you're looking at Yemen, there's terrain to appreciate. It is mountainous, rugged, rocky terrain. The Houthis have been there forever. They know that thing like the back of their hands. They know how to move around up there. They know where all the hiding spots are. They have gotten a better sense of how to avoid overhead detection from planes, and certainly as drones become a bigger part of it, from drones. And they have actually shot down some of our higher tech drones, so they are very familiar with what drones can do. The population with the Houthis, there's religion. It's the Shiite religion that holds them together. And with that, you're dealing with family, clan, tribe. That's their primary loyalties, and that's what they're all about. And so they're going to fight based on that loyalty, that structure, what they know. Doing something militarily, the logistics are daunting. The lines of communication are very difficult. You got mountainous terrain, narrow roads. You've got steep terrain to traverse if you bring it in by sea. Not a lot of options if you bring it in by air, and of course limited lift capabilities if you bring it in by air. So a lot of stuff there. And you also have to remember that whatever you do going in there, if the Egyptians were to go in there, or if the Saudis were to go back in there, or anything like that, it would immediately become Sunni versus Shiite. And now you're talking about something that goes back a very long way, and something where people will fight very, very hard to avoid that. So there's a lot of problems with trying to do a ground warfare type of thing there. The question is, if you take out the current Houthi leadership, what's going to replace it? All right? And how long would that situation last? Because the fundamentals in terms of demographics are not going to shift overnight. What popular support would it have? If you imposed a regime on the Houthis, in that region, would it have any support at all? Would it immediately have to go into a bunker mentality and have to hunker down? And what would that cost over a period of time? And it's in the middle of Houthi-controlled areas. and by the way, there's not a lot of wealthy resources. There are some minerals and things certainly that can be mined if you could get it out of there, but there's just not a lot that place that it really has in terms of economic value if you wanted to expend the resources to go in there and do it. One option, and it looked like this is what the Israeli strategy was to cut off sea and air. They went after the ports, they went after the airports, and it looked like their strategy was to basically cut off the umbilical cord that feeds the Houthi movement, certainly from Iran. Very difficult to do. That's a very congested waterway. A lot of ships out there trying to figure out which of those dhows is carrying weapons and which one isn't. A very difficult targeting standpoint to do, and you're not going to shut down all sea traffic in that region. That's just not going to happen. There's just a lot of small boats out there doing stuff. Land communications, the LOCs are literally surrounded by groups or by the government of Yemen and others who oppose the Houthis, but there's still stuff getting in there, all right? And so that's been a problem. Now, Abdul Malik al-Houthi is, been the nominal leader. What happens if you eliminate the nominal leader? One of the problems is that there's feelings that he isn't really that religious, and it's a religious-based group. And so his uncle has actually said, look, he's not that religious, I should be replacing him. And there's others that feel that he should have been replaced. So within the movement, there are already contenders to have him replaced. So if Western powers remove him, A, they kind of provide a cause for everyone to rally around, and then B, there's potential successors waiting in the wings that are anxious to go in there and replace him. So that's already in place, and so it's not clear that would do much. Now, I should mention in the Zaydi tradition, it's believed that the leader should be someone who has descended, if you will, from the Prophet Muhammad of Islam, and that leaders are required to fulfill certain responsibilities. That's why I bring up the point that he's not seen as being particularly religious, all right? And so that kind of weighs against him in terms of his legitimacy. In other words, you're taking out a leader who is already kind of controversial within his own following. So that's a big problem. And I mentioned, the issue with his uncle, but it's not just his uncle. There's others that feel very strongly the same way. So taking him out may not be decisive, may not really undermine the I don't know if I want to say organization, but the organizational cohesion of the whole group. It's not clear that would do it. Now, there may be some things that he brings in terms of strategic, operational know-how, capabilities, understanding that a potential successor wouldn't bring, but it's not clear taking him out would wipe out the strata of those around him who understand how to do things operationally. So anyway, much to think about with this resurgence of the Houthi anti-ship threats. Much to consider. The U.S. is probably not going to keep going it alone. We use up a lot of weapons, and we don't have a lot of weapons to waste. We used up a lot of anti-air weapons, very expensive anti-air assets going after really cheap drones and so-so anti-ship missiles. But you got to use them. And it's what we have, and it's what we have to use. So until we have a less expensive way to put our ships out there and a less expensive way to defend them, I think that we're just going to avoid it. But we're probably looking at, can we deal with the Houthis some other way? And that's a question that the Egyptians have. It's a question the U.S. has. It's a question that the European Union has. It's a question that every country in the world, and I would say every country that moves commerce over the waves, is asking, is there some way to eliminate the anti-ship threat posed by the Houthis? Anyway, much to consider, and of course on top of that is the impact they're having on the global economy by blocking shipping through that vital strait. Thanks for listening to STRAT. Hope you enjoyed that in-depth discussion on the Houthis out of Yemen and the threat and what can be done. Please visit stratpodcast.com. You can go to my YouTube channel, Hal Kempfert TV. You can go to the website, www.gripsa.com, or any of the other things that we have where we feature Strat across a number of different platforms. Thanks, and hope you listen to our next Strat podcast.